Welcome back to 89 Games. I'm Doug, and in today's video, we are jumping back into Gloomhaven with a complete class guide for the Brute. We'll cover everything from starting cards and items to each card from level 1 to 9, which perks to take first, and maybe even a few strategies centered around certain card combos. Now, we've already covered the basics, level 1 cards, and starting item ideas for the Brute before, so if you've seen that already and would like to jump to the leveled cards and leveling guide section, just use the timestamp in the description. Alright, let's get started. The Brute is a frontline fighter. He starts out with 10 health, which is what I like to refer to as tank health, since all characters who start with 10 health can tank fairly well. He only has a hand size of 10 though, which hinders his tanking somewhat since he has less cards to negate damage should the need arise. That said, he is a good early tank when played well and equipped properly. He has a few defensive abilities that allow him to take some extra hits, along with some control abilities to prevent enemy attacks. On offense, he has several strong attacks and even some multi-target attacks as well. In general, the Brute does well in one-on-one fights or taking a hit or two to protect other mercs, but a pincushion he is not. As is true for all classes, you should generally avoid unnecessary hits by retreating if need be, or preparing properly with some shield abilities while the other mercs move in to attack. With that said, let's move over to the cards now and delve in a little deeper. Trample is the first card with a decent top action with a good attack 3 with Pierce 2. Attack 3 is a decent attack value throughout the game, and Pierce 2 allows this attack to ignore up to 2 points of armor on an enemy, which is extremely useful when facing shielded enemies. The bottom of the card is a move 4 with jump, and you get to attack every enemy you move through for 2 and get 2 XP. This is a loss ability, meaning you lose this card for the rest of the scenario after it is played, but in the right situation, this can be a powerful play. Imagine using this to finish off 3 weakened enemies and then using the top action of your other card to finish off a 4th enemy. The jump on this card means that you can move through obstacles, enemies, and traps unaffected, which makes it an option for getting at ranged enemies behind obstacles too. The initiative on this card is a decent number for going late if you want to draw enemies into a retaliate or attack ability. Speaking of retaliate, Eye for an Eye is our first retaliate ability. Retaliate is an ability that forces an enemy to suffer damage when they attack us in melee. In this case, they would suffer 2 damage, and Brute would gain 1 XP each time an enemy suffers this damage. This particular ability will only last for the round in which it was activated, so we'd want to play this one early, and it can actually pair well with the bottom of Shield Bash, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The bottom of this card is a decent little pick-me-up with a heal 2 range 1 that also activates the earth element. As a tank, it's nice to have some heals, even if it's just a heal 2, and of course, since it has a range of 1, we could use this on an adjacent ally as well. Activating earth here won't help the Brute, but if you're playing with a Cragheart or Spellweaver in your party, they can benefit from the element for sure. The initiative is a nice 18, meaning we should be able to beat most monsters with it. Next up, we have Sweeping Blow. The top of this card is an attack 2 on up to 3 enemies. When you see a pattern like this, it means that your character has to be in the gray hex, with the enemies being located in the red hexes. So with this attack, you can only hit enemies in the 3 spaces in front of you. If you can pull this one off where you can actually hit 3 enemies, the attack 2 isn't too bad. But hitting only 1 or even 2 just isn't very good, making this attack a little more situational. The bottom of the card is a move 3 and push 1, targeting all adjacent enemies. This too can be situational. The move 3 is better than a base 2, and the push can be great if you can shove enemies into nearby traps. Of course, you have to have the traps nearby, otherwise this could be underwhelming. We'll find that a lot of cards will be situational though, so this doesn't automatically mean a card is bad, just that it might take some extra planning to use them effectively. The initiative here is not great at 64. Anything less than 70 will have a hard time going after monsters consistently. Provoking Roar Top is an attack 2 and disarm, which is actually really strong, especially when tanking for a round. Disarm will prevent the enemy from being able to attack for a turn and thus reduce the incoming damage to the Brute. Plus, we get attack 2 out of it as a bonus. The great part about status effects is that they still get applied even if our attack does no damage or we pull a miss card. So I often look at these low attack value status inflicting abilities as mainly there to give the status, and any damage done is just a bonus. The bottom of the card allows us to take the damage for any adjacent allies. Any attack on them is performed like it was made on us instead. This ability isn't too great at level 1 as we don't have enough damage mitigation yet, but can be really useful later on. The initiative at 10 is great for going early and will beat almost everything else out there. This next card can be great for taking out low level enemies quickly, though at a cost. Overwhelming Assault Top is an attack 6 with 2 XP, but it is a loss ability. Personally, I like to save this one for a particularly annoying enemy or for the end of the scenario. At lower levels, this attack can take out some enemies all on its own, making it very useful, but it will become less useful at higher levels due to the fact that it is a loss card. The bottom of the card is a pretty useful move 3 push 2 on one adjacent enemy. The push 2 gives us some more range, making it easier to push an enemy onto a trap or even out of range if they only have a move of 1. Initiative wise, we have a 61, which is pretty not useful. You probably won't ever use this card for its initiative value. Next we have Grab and Go. The top is a loot 1, which allows us to loot all tiles adjacent to us, which is actually pretty good when it comes to loot cards since this is a top ability. With this we could move and then loot, whereas most loot abilities are bottoms, meaning it can take 2 turns to get into position. The bottom is a move 4, which is probably the main reason to keep this one in your hand. At level 1, this is the Brute's only move higher than 3 that isn't a loss card. The initiative is an 87, which is great for going late. Maybe you let the enemy move first and get into range, and then you use this to move up and get a free attack off, then go early next round with a Retaliate and Shield ability. Planning ahead is a big part of this game. Okay, our first defensive card is Warding Strength. The top is a solid attack 3 with a push 2, making this a super effective attack if there's a trap nearby to push the enemy into. The bottom has our defensive ability with a shield 1 for the next 6 attacks that damage us. This is a loss card, but it is also an active ability, meaning it will stay active until all its charges are used up. This card will prevent 6 damage to us over its lifetime, as every attack that does damage will be reduced by 1. Since this is a loss card though, it may be better to wait until after the Brute's first rest before using it, as this can help with extending his playtime. The initiative is a 32, which is just meh. It's somewhat early, but not early enough to guarantee going before anything else. Next up we have Shield Bash, another defensive card. So the top is an attack 4 with stun. This is a loss, but stun is the most powerful control effect as the enemy will be unable to act at all on its next turn, and an attack 4 is a strong attack. This is another great play toward the end of a scenario to help clear the last room or to stop a particularly nasty attack from an enemy. The bottom of Shield Bash gives us a shield of 1 for the round, which pairs really well with Eye for an Eye as I mentioned earlier, because you can reduce incoming damage while still doing damage at the same time. This also works well anytime you just need to hold a position. The initiative is a 15, meaning we should be able to go pretty early with this one and get the shield on before we get attacked. Moving on now to Leaping Cleave, the top action here is an attack 3 on the 2 spaces in front of us and gives us 1 XP. This is a pretty useful all-around attack, as an attack 3 is good even if we only use it on 1 target, but if we can hit 2 targets with it, it becomes a lot better, dealing 6 total base damage between the 2 enemies. The bottom is a great move 3 with jump and activates wind. The bottom will be great for getting into position behind enemies or avoiding traps and obstacles. The initiative is crap at 54, but otherwise an all-around pretty useful and flexible card. This next card, Spare Dagger, is the Brute's only ranged attack at level 1. With attack 3 and range 3, it's actually a pretty strong ranged attack, and it gives us 1 XP. The bottom is actually an attack 2, which makes this a great card for some burst damage when you are already adjacent to an enemy. You can use the top attack of another card, and then the bottom attack on this one to attack twice in the same turn, which is very powerful in Gloomhaven in general. The initiative is somewhat lacking at 27, meaning it's not great for going early, but it might get the job done against some slower monsters. That's it for the level 1 cards, but we have 3 level X cards. These cards are here to give us a few options at level 1, but are generally a little more situational and difficult to use. So let's start off with Skewer. Skewer has an awesome top if you can pull it off effectively. An attack 3 targeting 2 enemies in a line with 1 XP and an additional attack 1 and pierce 1 added if we have wind to consume. This can be a great move to take out 2 shielded enemies, or at least damage them pretty good, but getting them to line up like this and then having wind isn't going to happen often. The Brute can prep wind on the turn before with Leaping Cleave bottom, but there is no guarantee the enemies will still be lined up the next turn, as an element doesn't get infused until the end of the infusing character's turn. You'll probably use this card more often on a single target, but even still, if you can consume wind, an attack 4, pierce 1 on one target is still really good. The bottom of Skewer is a move 6, gain 1 XP lost card. I would rarely ever use this card for the bottom, as it's just not worth giving up the top of this card for a move 6. In a minute, we'll talk about the level 1 items to load the Brute out with, and you'll see why this move 6 is meh. The initiative 2 is meh at 35. Next is Balanced Measure. Now, I actually used this one quite a bit in my playthrough of the board game version because of the top. The top is an attack where the value of the attack is determined by how many hexes you moved first. Played well, this can get you an attack of 4, 5, 6, or better, and 1 XP. The bottom is a move where the value of the move is how much damage you've inflicted this turn. I found this side of the card less useful, but planned out right, it could get a pretty high move value. With Initiative 77, this card should allow you to go later than most enemies most turns. Finally, we have Wall of Doom. The top gives us Retaliate 2 and Shield 2 for 1 round and 2 XP, but it's a lost card. The top is pretty situational, as you'll want to be taking a lot of hits to make this worth it, probably something like 4 or more. That would result in at least 8 damage to enemies, and with a shield 2, you'll probably take only 3 to 5 points of damage depending on the enemies. The bottom will add +1 attack to all your attacks for the round, and is not a loss. This can be good when you're already in position, and can use one of your area attacks to hit multiple enemies, but again, this can be very situational. Alright, let's talk about starting items. The Brute should definitely take the Heater Shield and a health potion to get started. This will help him with tanking hits and lasting longer in the scenario. The next pickup should be the Boots of Striding. These will allow the Brute to add +2 move to 1 move ability every long rest. This will help him keep up with the more mobile mercs and increase the damage of Balanced Measure if you're using it. Next is Hide Armor, once you've grabbed the perk to make the Brute immune to negative item effects, because Hide Armor will add 2 -1 attack modifiers otherwise. As far as the head and second hand item, these are less clear cut and more or less up to personal preference. If you plan on Brute getting hit a lot, then the Iron Helm might be a good choice to cancel crits, but the Eagle Eye Goggles could be good for his area attacks or his lost card attacks to prevent them from being negated by a miss, since the Eagle Eye Goggles give you advantage. For the second hand item, the only viable one while using a shield is the Poison Dagger, since the other 2 hand items are 2-handed items. That said, if you want to forego the shield, the Warhammer could be useful during an AoE attack, but personally, I think the Brute is better off with the shield, especially at level 1. Thank you, Past Doug. So with that said, we are on to the new section of the video now. We'll start by moving right into each level with recommendations on which cards to take and how they can be used, and then we'll talk perks and finally higher level items to upgrade to once you have Gloomhaven's prosperity high enough to unlock them. Speaking of which, there may be some light spoilers in the item section, though I am sticking to prosperity unlock items only. So, starting at level 2, we get to choose between Fatal Advance and Juggernaut. Now, at first glance, Fatal Advance top looks pretty good, being that it is an instant automatic kill on an adjacent normal enemy for 2 experience points, but it is also a loss card. This is just terrible. I mean, yes, it's a free kill, but since this is a loss, you're going to lose turns just to kill a normal enemy, plus as a tank, you may need a spare card to negate damage later on as well. The bottom is a strong move 4, but I really don't see that making up for the top. The initiative isn't anything great either. Juggernaut, on the other hand, gives us a move and attack on the top, which can be great paired with Spare Dagger bottom for some burst damage. Then the bottom gives us invulnerability for the next 3 sources of damage, though it is a lost card. Still, the bottom can be great for tanking for a round while everyone else attacks, and if active at the same time as the bottom of Warding Strength, the Brute can tank a whole room without too much trouble. The initiative isn't great, but that's pretty common with the Brute. So for level 2, I'm taking Juggernaut every time, and I'd take out Grab and Go to add it in. At level 3, we get Hook and Chain and Brute Force. Now, with these two, they each have their merits, so let's discuss Hook and Chain first. The top here is a pretty decent attack 3 with range 3 and pull 2. This ability has a lot of versatility because of the pull. We can skip the pull and just get a nice range attack off, or we can use the pull to make sure the enemies focus on us instead of an ally, or we can even pull an enemy over a trap. Then the bottom is a nice move 4, but if we move in a straight line, we get an attack with power equal to how many spaces we moved. Basically, the hook shot from The Legend of Zelda, except better. Keep in mind, this has to be in a straight line though, so the attack part is situational, but even just the move 4 is really good. So, if Hook and Chain is the attack card, Brute Force is definitely the defensive card. The top is an attack 2 and Muddle, targeting up to 3 enemies for 1 experience point, while the bottom is a move 2, shield 1 for the round. Now, I typically take Hook and Chain for its versatility, but if you want to lean heavy into the tanking role with less of a concern for dealing damage, Brute Force can be a good choice here. The decision really comes down to how you want to play the Brute, though I will say that in a party of only 2, you'd probably be better off with Hook and Chain to keep your damage potential up. Neither card has great initiative, so that doesn't really factor in here. As far as what to set aside to add this choice in, I'd say swap out Sweeping Blow for whichever card you take. At level 4, we're faced with an interesting choice. On the one hand, we have Unstoppable Charge, which has a top with attack 5 and gain 1 XP, and a bottom with a move 4 and stun all adjacent enemies for a loss. Then, on the other hand, we have Devastating Hack, which on top is an attack 8 for 3 XP for a loss, while on the bottom it is a loot 1. Each card has decent initiative, Unstoppable Charge for going late, and Devastating Hack for going somewhat early. Personally, I take Unstoppable Charge here because a repeatable attack 5 and 1 XP is very good and very rare, plus the move 4 stun all adjacent enemies can be a powerful control ability when needed. Devastating Hack sounds really cool with its attack 8, but I can only do it once for 8 damage and 3 XP. I can do Unstoppable Charge's attack 5 twice and gain 2 XP for 10 damage, or 3 times for 3 XP and 15 damage. The math favors the attack 5 for sure since it's reusable. As far as what card to take out, I'd say either Provoking Roar or Overwhelming Assault, depending on how important mobility is for you, since the bottom of Overwhelming Assault is a move 3. At this point, our mobility is really low, so the Boots of Striding I mentioned during item setup will be all the more important. Next up, at level 5, we have Whirlwind and Skirmishing Maneuver. Whirlwind Top is great for an XP booster if you can manage to hit 3 or more enemies with it, plus when paired with a Power Potion and Advantage from Eagle Eye Goggles or the Strengthened status, this attack can be a room-clearing attack. However, this ability is a lost one, and it can be quite situational to get the most bang out of it. The bottom could help us out with our mobility too, so not a bad choice necessarily, but I prefer to take Skirmishing Maneuver, mostly because it doesn't have any loss actions. The Brute just can't afford to use more than 2 loss actions with a hand size of only 10, and I'd rather use those on abilities that keep him alive like Juggernaut and Warding Strength bottom, though you could build him as a damage dealer and focus on those loss action cards. This would probably require a second tank like the Cragheart in the party though. Aside from not having loss actions though, Skirmishing Maneuver also gives us flexibility with an attack 2, move 2, then attack 2, which is great for mobility, burst damage, or even finishing off a couple of weakened enemies with one ability. Then the bottom gives us some ranged burst potential with a rare bottom ranged attack action and an experience point to boot. As far as what to swap out for Skirmishing Maneuver, I'd probably take out Spare Dagger at this point, as Skirmishing Maneuver is almost a straight upgrade of it. Then at level 6 we have Quietus and Immovable Phalanx. So I'll start by saying that I've always taken Immovable Phalanx as it is the less situational of the two, with an attack 4 and shield 1 for the round on the top. This is great for dealing some high damage and guarding against damage at the same time. The bottom I don't think I've ever used though. It sounds really good in theory, basically turning every move action into an attack instead, but this will require you to start your turn already next to an enemy to be effective, generally speaking. Finally, the initiative is one of the lowest ones you'll find in the Brute's cards. Quietus, however, could be extremely effective if you have the Mind Thief in your party, as she can stun quite often. Plus, this is a repeatable insta-kill, so long as the enemy is stunned. Outside of having a reliable source of stuns though, this ability becomes almost useless. The bottom of Quietus could be put to good use with a bit of mobility and an attack boost, but the initiative is another terrible middling one. So I'm probably taking immovable Phalanx every time. At this point, I'd take out Shield Bash to put in immovable Phalanx. At level 7, we get to choose between Defensive Tactics and Crippling Offensive. As the names suggest, Defensive Tactics is great for playing into the tank side of things, while Crippling Offensive leans into damage and burning hot. Personally, I'd take Defensive Tactics. The top is useful to lock down a couple of melee enemies since it's ranged and immobilizes, and the repeatable XP is nice too. The bottom of the card, however, is why I would take it. A permanent Retaliate 1 and Shield 1, then 2 XP is just too good for a tank to pass up. Even though you'll be down 1 card, the damage reduction will keep you in the fight much longer, and your enemies will slowly kill themselves on you. The other card though, Crippling Offensive, isn't all bad. Depending on your playstyle, you may want to take it, but while attack 6 wound and stun for 3 XP sounds really good, it is another loss attack, and with the health of enemies you'll be fighting at this level, attack 6 wound and stun isn't that great, considering there are other ways to get the same result that don't burn an ability card. The bottom is another decent move for locking down a melee enemy as you get to move, immobilize, and then push one target. As far as initiatives go, Crippling Offensive loses that fight too with a 33 compared to Defensive Tactics 26. Now, as far as what to trade out for Defensive Tactics, I'd go with Provoking Roar if you haven't removed it yet and don't mind losing the low initiative, or go with Warding Strength if you feel you don't need the extra shield ability. Though Warding Strength could give you 2 shields for 5 hits when combined with Defensive Tactics. Now, at level 8, we get Frenzied Onslaught and Selfish Retribution. This choice is a little hard to make, but I think I would go with Selfish Retribution here. The top sucks, move 1 and loot 2 for a loss isn't that great unless you really need the money, but the bottom gives us a move 3 and retaliate 2 for the round along with 1 XP, and the initiative is a 12. I'd use this bottom with Defensive Tactics bottom activated, and then use the top of Eye for an Eye to get 5 total retaliate and 1 shield during the round. Then I'd move up into the middle of as many enemies as possible and watch as I do 15, 20, 25 damage without even attacking. As an added bonus, all the aggro should be on me as well, meaning the rest of the party is safe from attack for the round. At level 8 with a shield and 24 health and maybe some shield from armor too, Brute should easily be able to take all these hits and come out in decent shape still. Now, the other card, Frenzied Onslaught, just seems weaker and much more situational. The top is a very flexible move, attack, move, attack. That's okay, I guess, but attack 2 isn't that great at level 8. The bottom sounds strong, but it's too situational for me. I'd almost have to have those status affected enemies adjacent to me at the start of the round, and then beat their initiative to get the extra 3 damage for my attack. Now, granted, a top ability with move and attack or a range attack could make this more viable, but this feels like one of those cards I would take and then never use except for the top. The initiative also is a poor one at 41. So I would take Selfish Retribution and then probably swap out Hook and Chain, though depending on the enemies in a scenario, I may swap these back and leave Selfish Retribution out. For example, if a scenario features a lot of ranged enemies, then Selfish Retribution's Retaliate isn't going to work well, but the range attack and pull of Hook and Chain will. In fact, as a side note, once you get to the higher levels, you may find it makes more sense to swap out some more specialized cards for certain scenarios. Part of the power of being a higher level in Gloomhaven is the versatility you are given in setting up your hand. Finally, at level 9, we will see King of the Hill and Face Your End. So remember the move we just talked about where you can retaliate for 5? King of the Hill top is what you do the next turn, with advantage when possible, to finish off all those enemies. This top is what I would consider a blow up the room attack, but with the caveat that you have to have the enemies adjacent to you to do the damage. I normally don't like the loss attacks with a smaller hand size here, as you've probably figured out, but in this case you could hit up to 6 enemies with it, gaining 6 XP and equaling a total of 36 damage, but probably more with your upgraded modifier deck. The bottom, however, I feel I would use a lot, as it's a repeatable heal self 5, which is always nice when you're playing a tank. Face Your End, on the other hand, isn't bad either, as you could use the top ability to pull enemies in so they focus on you and take the retaliate damage if you use the bottom of Selfish Retribution with it, plus you get 1 XP. The XP, of course, both here and on King of the Hill really isn't worth anything now that you're at level 9. But anyway, the bottom of Face Your End could be really good for that one really annoying shielded enemy, as you could just insta-kill it, but it is a loss. So I think I'd take King of the Hill, but I'd probably be using the bottom heal most of the time. Both cards' initiatives aren't the best, though Face Your End 67 could help you go later if you needed to. I don't really have a good recommendation for what to take out at this point, and it would really depend on what card combos you plan on using. If I had to pick, I'd say Warding Strength, but that could change depending on the current scenario that I'm playing. Now that we've covered all the leveled cards, let's talk about the Brute's perks. Just as an overall primer for picking perks, you generally want to grab the special ones like Ignore Negative Item Effects and Ignore Negative Scenario Effects if your character has them, then move into removing as many negatives as possible, adding as many positives as possible, removing your +0s, and finally picking up the rolling modifiers. Rolling modifiers can roll into misses and other negative modifiers, and this is why I like to have a stacked deck with less of a chance of this happening before I add them in. So with that overview out of the way, for the Brute, first go for Fortitude to ignore negative item effects and add a +1 modifier. This will allow us to wear better armor without having to add negative modifiers into our deck. Next, move to the top of the list with Consistency to remove 2 -1s, then Focus to replace a -1 with a +1. At this point, this is as many negatives as we can remove, leaving us with our -2, 2 -1s, and our miss or null card. Now move on to take Power twice, then Outburst to give us 2 more +1s and a +3, then the last positive to pick up is Bulwark, which gives us a +1 attack and +1 shield for the round. At this point, we should have a 5-to-1 ratio of positive or 0 modifiers versus negative modifiers. Now we can start adding in the rolling modifiers, and I would start with Stab to add 2 rolling Pierce 3 cards. Then Bludgeon for the stuns, Pacify for the disarm and muddle, Sweep for the add targets, and finally Thrust for the push. You may want to grab the rolling stun first, as that technically is of higher value, but I like to take Stab first because I get 2 of the rolling Pierce modifiers for only the 1 perk point. Now we come to the higher level item recommendations. I'm going to go through each prosperity level and give you my thoughts on what you might want to equip the Brute with, but remember that item choices can vary greatly between playstyles and players, and even between playthroughs. So don't take what I say as you have to take this item, it's more like I've used this before and it worked for me. So with that out of the way, let's jump in. We've already mentioned starting gear, where we grabbed up the Eagle Eye Goggles, the Hide Armor, the Boots of Striding, the Heater Shield, and Poison Dagger, and a Health Potion. So starting at level 2 Prosperity, we can swap out our Poison Dagger for the Battle Axe. Then at Prosperity 3, we'll upgrade to Chainmail Armor and pick up the Major Healing Potion. This could replace our Minor Healing Potion, or we could just keep both if we have the item slots for them, as we get to carry 1 more item per every 2 character levels. Also, I should note here that I would also pick up a Stamina Potion once we can carry it in addition to our Health Potion. Moving on to Prosperity 4 though, the Tower Shield should be picked up as the upgrade to our Heater Shield, then the Major Stamina Potion can be taken in place of our Minor Stamina Potion. At Prosperity 5, we can upgrade to the Boots of Dashing, then at Prosperity 6, we can upgrade our armor to Splint Mail and consider swapping our Tower Shield for the Spiked Shield. The Spiked Shield has 1 less shield value, but adds 2 Retaliate. Also at level 6, we can pick up the Sun Earring, which gives us all of our spent items like armor back without having to take a long rest, and heals us for 3 HP. At Prosperity 7, we can pick up the Super Healing Potion, and at 8, we can upgrade to the Wall Shield. Finally, at Prosperity 9, we can get Plate Mail Armor and upgrade the Sun Earring to the Star Earring. As I said, these items are just some options that you can take, and probably some of the simpler options as well. Depending on what you want to do, different items can be combined in some pretty interesting ways to create some very overpowered effects, even if by themselves they seem weak. With that said, that is the Brute in exhaustive detail. If you'd like a shorter overview of Gloomhaven in general, I've got this video for you right here. Remember to like, subscribe, and all that jazz if you liked the video and made it this far. More Gloomhaven content is on the way. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and keep on gaming.